Hello and welcome to our fourth webinar dedicated to the new additions in oXygen XML Editor version 17. In the first webinar, we presented an overview of oXygen 17 new additions. Then we went through the user interface improvements. And last week, we explored the quick fixes support. You can find all these three webinars recorded on our website. Now we'll deep dive into XML refactoring. My name is George Bina. I'm one of the founders of Syncrosoft, the company that develops oXygen XML Editor, and I invited my colleague Alex. Hi Alex.
Hello everybody, it's good to be here.
To present this webinar, while me and a few other colleagues from Syncrosoft will be available to answer your questions during the webinar. Before Alex starts his presentation, here it is some useful information. Yes, the webinar will be recorded and it will be made available on our website. This is the most frequent question we used to receive until we answered that from the start. You will receive a notification message after the webinar as soon as the recording is available. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar interface. And there is no need to wait until the end of the webinar to ask questions. As I mentioned before, some of my colleagues are online and they will answer together with me your questions as we go. At the end of the webinar, we have a dedicated Q&A section where you will be able to ask also questions during that time, and will respond live to questions received during the webinar. In case you use Twitter, you can mark your webinar related messages with the oXygen XML hashtag, so we can easily filter them and identify your messages. And that is another channel that you can use to ask questions. I will monitor that as well as the questions you send directly using the questions panel. That being said, I will give control to Alex to start his presentation. Alex?
Thank you, George. Hello again. So in today's presentation, we're going to talk about refactoring XML documents. The first question we need to answer is, why do we need this new tool? Well, the main reason is that documents evolve, and from time to time we discover we need to make some changes in a great number of them. And without the right tools, it can turn into a headache. But aren't the existing tools enough? Let's take the existing find replace dialog, which is very intuitive. You tell it what to find and what to replace it with. And by combining regular expressions, XPath, and XML search options, you can achieve quite complex scenarios. But on the downside, there's still limited XML structure awareness, mainly because it wasn't designed specifically for XML structure. And yes, you can use regular expressions to compensate for that lack of structure awareness, but you'll have to learn regular expressions, and truth be told, things can get really ugly really fast on very complex scenarios. And that brings us to the next question. Isn't an already existing solution specifically designed for processing XML documents? Well, yes, there is. We have XSLT and XQuery, especially update. But although they provide great power, there is still a learning curve that not everybody is willing to take. Plus, there are some technical annoyances that we will talk about later on. So with this solution, with XSLT and XQuery, we gain power, but we lose user friendliness and accessibility. The conclusion would be that we need something as powerful as XQuery and XSLT, but as easy to use and simple as a find replace dialog. And thus the XML refactoring tool was born. So where can this tool be found in oXygen? Well, you can find it virtually anywhere. There's an action on the toolbar. There's another one in the main menu, in the Tools menu, and you can also find it in the contextual menus of the project view and the data map manager. Basically in all resource management oriented views. Let's take a quick introductory look. This tool has been developed as a wizard. In the first page that we see right now, we can see all the available operations grouped into categories. There's even a filter on top that you can use to quickly find an operation. The next page, each operation has a set of specific parameters. So after you select an operation, you have to give values for these parameters. Let's take the case of the delete attribute operation. To perform this operation, we need to give the name of the parent element and the name of the attribute to remove. Moving on, the last wizard page allows you to select the set of files to be processed by the operations. There are quite a large selection of scopes, as you can see, but we will cover them also later on when we will use the wizard. Before applying the operation, you can also preview the results. We will also see that at work. Let's see what's coming up next. The presentation is structured in two parts. In the first part, we will use the XML refactoring tool from a user perspective. We will present some use cases and how we can use the predefined operations to solve them. In the second part, we will see things from a more developer-oriented perspective. You will understand the refactoring process and we will create a new operation for a use case not coverable by the predefined ones. Finally, we will talk about how we can share this newly created operation with the rest of the team. It's worth mentioning that an enterprise license is required to use custom operations. Let's move on to the first use case in which we want to change the value of an existing attribute. Our sample files are from the DocBook vocabulary and they describe how to install a photo album application on different platforms by using the OS profiling attribute. In our case, let's suppose we want to change the Windows part from the attribute value with Win. I'll go to oXygen. My sample files are located here in this directory and this is one of them. So as you can see, there's the OS attribute and the Windows token being present in some of those attributes. Let's invoke the XML refactoring tool from the toolbar. Like I said, it's virtually everywhere. We want to replace, so we select the replace in attribute value operation. There's the parameters page. So I want this change to be performed in any element, and like I said, the attribute name is OS. I want to find Windows and I want to replace it with win. Next. Now there's the scope selection. Let's create a working set, so the set of files that should be processed by the operation. We create a new working set, and we can add the resources to this working set, all the files that I want to be processed. Let's preview the result of the operation. So here on the top of the dialog you can see all the affected resources, and here I have I can see the differences, what changed in the file. So I see that the Windows token, it's replaced with Win. So it all looks good. So I can now accept the changes, and as you can see in the editor, the change was the file on my disk was updated. Let's return to our slides. As you've seen, there are quite a few predefined operations. Some of them work on attributes, like these ones, others on elements, and we have a few others that work with XML fragments. These operations are intended to cover most of the basic refactoring cases, like adding or removing an attribute or an element. For the next example, we have a data document. And because the title is not mandatory, some authors have simply used a paragraph with a bold element in it. The data vocabulary is lax enough that it allows this kind of a situation, at least for a section. To identify these elements, we can go to oXygen and we can run an XPath on the current data map hierarchy. So I have opened the map here in the data maps manager, and if I say I want to see all the sections that don't have a title and have a paragraph with a bold element, I see that I have quite a few of these situations, so sections without a title. Okay. There is no predefined operation for this particular case, but we can still fix it by combining two existing operations: a rename element and an unwrap. So what we want to do is to rename the paragraph into a title, and after that unwrap the bold element, which is no longer needed. Let's switch again to oXygen and see how that works. From the data maps manager, I will invoke the XML refactoring action. We want to rename an element. This operation works with XPath expressions. So the first parameter is an XPath expression that identifies the elements to be renamed. So in my case, I want from the sections that do not have a title to get the P element with a bold in it. Of course, you could refine this XPath expression, but for our demonstration it will do just like that. And we want to rename this paragraph into a title. Next. The scope, because I have invoked the action from the data maps manager context, the scope has been automatically set to the current data maps hierarchy. So there's no need for me to change that. Now let's preview the changes. There are two affected files, and we can see that the paragraph element has been replaced with a title. The bold element, it's still there for now. Let's finish. Let's apply the change. We can also see that the file on disk has been updated. I now have a title. So the next step is to invoke the action again. This time I want to unwrap something. So I will select the unwrap element. Next. This operation also works on an XPath expression, so from the section, from each section element, I want to unwrap the bold element from the title. Next. The scope remains the same. Let's preview the changes. Again, two affected resources, and this time the bold element was removed and replaced by its content. Let's accept the changes, and now my sections are as intended, each section with its own title element. Before moving forward, I want this to be your takeaway from this slide. By creatively combining the predefined operation, you can cover a lot more use cases than the predefined ones can cover by themselves. Let's return to the slides. So, now it's time to move to the second part of our presentation. We will take a look under the hood and see how it all works. You'll be happy to know that it's all based on XQuery update scripts. In this image, we see that an operation, an XML refactoring operation, is defined as a pair of two resources. First, there's an XQuery update script that will be executed to refactor the XML files. Second, we have an XML descriptor file that contains information like operation name, parameters, and so on. This operation, together with the source document that you want to refactor, go into the XML refactoring tool. The transformation, the XQuery update transformation is being executed, and the input file is updated. But now you will ask, won't the XQuery expand entities drop doctype declaration and mess up the attribute order? Yes, normally an XQuery script doesn't care about the attribute order because it's not relevant. But although not relevant, I would prefer to minimize the changes when committing to my version control system, so the attribute order is important. Another thing that XQuery does is expand entities, and that can also be a problem because I'm using those entities for a reason. And last, I definitely wouldn't want to lose the doctype since it's what defines my documents, the vocabulary they're in. Well, you can rest assured because we've taken care of all those nuisances, and we will preserve the attributes order and the doctype and the entities. So you can concentrate on the script alone. Now let's take a situation that can be covered by the predefined operation. How to convert an attribute to an element with the same name? And the answer is, of course, by creating a custom operation. Okay. It all starts with the XQuery script. At the beginning of the script, I have an external variable for each input needed from the user. we will also need a descriptor, an XML descriptor file. This descriptor file contains parameter definitions for every external variable in the script. The descriptor file is being read and the parameters are presented in the wizard so the user can provide values for them. As you can see, there's this label here, we present the label, and so on. And this is how it all works together. The dialog presents the parameters, the user gives some values, and oXygen will forward them to the XQuery script. And because I know you'll be disappointed if I don't show you the XQuery script, here it is in all of its glory. So like I said at the beginning, we have external variables for each parameter. A little down we have some logic about finding out which prefix to use, and at the end is the actual XQuery update. So just these couple of lines. So I will insert a new element. The content is the content of the current attribute, and after that I will delete the attribute, and it's just as simple as that. Okay, now that we have the operation, let's see how we can install it in an oXygen instance and how to share it with the rest of the team. When working in oXygen, you usually have a project. What you can do is to ship your operations together with a project, so they will be automatically available for everyone using that project. Let's do that. So the files are present in the directory structure of my project, as you can see. So what we need to do is to go into Options, Preferences. On the refactoring page, first of all, let's switch this page to project level. What this means is that all the options from this page will be stored in the project file, in this XPR file. So all users who will open this file will automatically get these options. Because I want this option to be portable, I will use the project directory editor variable to give the location of my custom operations, like that. Let's click OK. Before evoking the tool, I can also open a document that should be updated. So here I have an image element, and this image element has an alt attribute, and the convert operation should convert this attribute into an element with the same name. So let's invoke again the XML refactoring actions from the data maps manager, and a new operation has appeared. You can see it here. This is my custom operation. So let's select it. These are the parameters that I've chosen to define. I was thinking that maybe I could reuse this convert operation in a different context, so that's why perhaps there are more parameters than required. So the parent element is image, and I want the alt attribute to be replaced with an alt element from no namespace since it's data and we don't have namespaces. Next, the scope is the right one. Let's preview the changes. So there are 3 affected files and the attribute is gone and it's being replaced with an element with the same name and with the same content. Let's accept the changes, and we can also see that the change was performed on disk. So now I have an element and no attribute. There are other ways to share the operations. oXygen has this concept of a framework, which basically represents a configuration file together with necessary resources like CSS files or schemas and so on. Basically, it bundles all that is needed to offer special support for an XML vocabulary. If your operations are intended for a particular vocabulary, then it is only natural to bundle them into the framework. To do that, just create a directory named refactoring in the framework directory and drop the operations there, and oXygen will load them automatically. Another oXygen concept is the plugin. A plugin represents a software component designed to add extended functionality by using a series of extension points provided by oXygen. We've created a new type of plugin that basically contributes XML refactoring operations. Each plugin has a descriptor file. You can see such a descriptor file in this slide. The point of interest here is the type attribute and the fact that it defines a couple of directories. These directories contain XML refactoring operations, like I've presented, an XQuery file together with an XML descriptor. On the file system, it all looks like this. The descriptor file, plugin XML, this is, well actually plugin XML is the descriptor file for an oXygen plugin, and these directories that contain refactoring operations. Starting with version 14, oXygen has introduced a new add-on deployment support that allows plugins and frameworks to be automatically discovered and installed from remote locations. So if you choose to distribute the operations either in the framework or in a plugin, you can pack them as add-ons and the user can install them from a friendly interface. Let me show you how that would look. So in oXygen, on the Help menu, there's an Install New Add-ons action. We will tell it to look in all the available sites for add-ons, and the user could see something like this. A plugin that contributes data-related XML refactoring operations for converting unordered list to ordered list and so on. And if it needs this operation, then it can select it for installation. Another plugin is available that contributes docbook, paragraph level operations, as maybe it converts paragraphs to list and so on. So maybe I need it, maybe I don't need it. It's my choice. And after that I can just accept the license agreement and install these new operations, and they will be available in my instance of oXygen. And last but not least, there is a predefined directory in an oXygen installation which is called also refactoring, and if you drop your actions in this directory, they will also be automatically discovered. Some future plans about this XML refactoring support. So what do we think it's worth doing in the future? First of all, XQuery Update is great, but XSLT has a larger audience. So we thought it a good idea to also allow refactoring operations based on XSLT scripts instead of XQuery Update. And as a matter of fact, this feature is already in progress. Another feature is to allow users to save an operation together with values for the parameters as a favorite. This will make it faster to reuse a generic operation for a specific context. Another idea is to put the refactoring actions into the contextual menu of the editor. That will make them faster to use, since the scope will be already known, the editor, so you'll only need to go through one wizard page maybe, or maybe through none at all. And of course, if you have any suggestions, we'll be more than happy to hear them, if you haven't sent them already. And we're nearly at the end, but before we conclude, because I'm merely the messenger here, I feel compelled to give credit where credit is due. So these are my colleagues that made all this possible. From left to right, Radu, Alina, Theo, and Alin. And if you liked what you've seen, then they should receive your praises. This concludes our presentation. Thank you, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions that you haven't already asked, this would be the time to ask them. Thank you. George?
Thank you, Alex. So we already received a few questions, so let's see if we can go through them, and in the meanwhile you can ask additional questions. So just before the webinar, actually, we received an email on support and asking how to delete attributes from an element when only so not only the element is important, the element name, but also some condition applies to that element. And the answer is that is not possible with the default actions that are provided with the oXygen. But as Alex presented, you can define your own refactoring actions. So you can either create an action that takes an XPath expression to identify the element. So then you can filter, for instance, image that has placement equals in line, and in this way you can select the elements that will be processed by the refactoring action, or you can define a specific action that says maybe fix images, and that automatically performs the exact fixes that you want. There was also a question about the replace operation presented initially, whether that was aware if Win was already present on an attribute value. And you know, if an attribute value had both Windows and Win set on it. And in this case, this replace in attribute value operation, of course, does not have that capability to automatically determine that. Although again, here, if you can filter the elements that the operation applies on with an XPath, then you can also put such a condition directly in the XPath operation that identifies, in the parameter that identifies the nodes to be processed, the elements to be processed. Then it was also another question about the find field does not take a regex or wildcard. Is that right? And one answer was to use the replacing attribute value to modify the values of existing attributes. And the find field accepts regular expressions. For example, to match the entire content of an attribute, you can use a dot star to select that entire content. And there is also so one follow-up to this was that add change attribute can be used instead of replacing attribute value, maybe to obtain the same result. Okay. I don't see any other questions. So
well, I could, sorry George, I could also show you how an XSLT script would look like for an XML refactoring operation. Like I've told you, it's already work in progress and nearly completion. Just a second. I should be somewhere around here. Oh, there it is. Right, so XSLT has to work, a script based on XSLT has to work a little different than an XQuery update. So basically, again, we have parameters at the beginning of the script for the input that is required from the user. And after that, so this particular operation is a delete element operation. So this one receives an XPath that identifies the element to be deleted. Here we are executing this XPath, and we get the elements identified by this XPath. So these are the elements that should be deleted. And here we have a template that matches on any element, and if this element is not one that should be deleted, then it just copies. So it has a copy template here, and basically we have to copy those elements that we don't want to be deleted, and at the end we will get an entire document with the new content, and we will detect if changes were made and replace this new content into the original content. So that's how an XSLT based XML refactoring operation would work compared with an XQuery update, which is more to the point.
Well, I can also say a few words of why we actually considered adding this functionality. At some point when we were working on our user guide, we wanted to change the way actions were described in the user guide, and there were, I think, about 1,000 places where we needed to make changes, and we had to do that manually, mainly because we were not able to easily process with XSLT or XQuery update the entire set of documents, preserving, as Alex mentioned initially, attributes order or doc type declarations. In our case, we are using data, so those doc type declarations were important. And these refactoring operations make all this a lot easier, because they will keep as much as possible the form the document is serialized in. Alex, can you show also the last slide? Okay, so thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Alex, for a great presentation. But before we end the webinar, I would like to mention also a few upcoming events. We still have 2 more webinars dedicated to oXygen 17 that will take place during the following 2 weeks, every Wednesday at the same time as today, 11 a.m. EDT. So please join us again to find about the new data additions and the new HTML5 JavaScript-based XML authoring interface. And in a couple of days, will be me and Alex actually will be in London, where we have this Friday an oXygen users meetup, and after that we will be at XML London, where we will exhibit and we will present a very interesting session at the XML London conference. So thank you again, and I hope to meet you either virtually at one of the upcoming webinars, or in person at one of the conferences we attend. Thanks again, thanks Alex. Goodbye everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.